You know, we all think we know where our food comes from, right? Farms. But what if I told you that behind that idyllic image of rolling green hills, there's a hidden story of pollution on a massive industrial scale? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the environmental price tag of animal agriculture. And trust me, it's a whole lot higher than you might think.
So let's just dive right in with a question. When you picture an industrial farm, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? The animals, right? But what about what they leave behind? What do you think is the single biggest waste product coming out of this whole system? The answer? Well, it might just surprise you. And it's the key to understanding this entire problem.
And this really gets to the heart of it all, what we're calling the invisible burden. See, we see the neat, clean packages of meat in the supermarket, but what we don't see is the absolutely massive waste stream that's created just to produce them. It's a hidden cost that has a very real, very tangible impact on our planet. And the answer to that big question is manure, or as it's known in German, Gülle. And look, we are not talking about a little bit of fertilizer for your backyard garden. We're talking about literal mountains of it, produced every single day by millions and millions of pigs, cows, and chickens. This stuff is ground zero for a whole host of environmental problems.
So what on earth happens to all this manure? Well, a lot of it gets spread on fields as fertilizer, which sounds good in theory. But here's the catch. There's just way too much of it. The land simply can't absorb it all. And when you have too much of a good thing, it starts to cause some really serious problems. Let's follow the journey of this manure, from the field all the way to our waterways.
Okay, now what's really fascinating is when we break down what's actually in the manure. This slide shows the three main culprits: nitrate, phosphorus, and ammonia. And each one of these has its own different and pretty devastating impact on the environment. We're going to start by looking at those first two.
And this just perfectly illustrates the domino effect. So when rain washes that excess nitrate and phosphorus into our rivers and lakes, it's basically like dumping rocket fuel on a fire for algae. You get these massive, choking algae blooms. Then, as all that algae dies and decomposes, it sucks all the oxygen right out of the water. And the result? It suffocates fish and other aquatic life, creating what are literally called dead zones.
So we've just seen how manure pollutes our water. But the story, it doesn't end there. That third chemical on our list, ammonia, well, it has a completely different target, the very air we breathe.
That's right. As all that manure just sits there, in giant storage lagoons or in the animal stalls themselves, it's constantly releasing ammonia gas straight into the atmosphere. And this isn't just about a bad smell, not at all. It's a serious air pollutant with some really far-reaching consequences.
And here is where it gets genuinely scary. When that ammonia mixes with other pollutants up in the air, it creates something called particulate matter, or Feinstaub in German. We're talking about microscopic particles that we breathe deep into our lungs, and they can cause serious damage to our respiratory systems and even our hearts. This is a direct line connecting industrial farming to human health problems.
But you know, the waste from animal agriculture isn't just invisible gases and chemicals. There's also a more gruesome side to the story: the physical byproducts of the slaughtering process itself.
So what happens to all the parts of the animal that don't end up on our dinner plates? We're talking blood, bones, organs. This slide shows the two main paths. Some of it gets utilized, turned into biogas for energy or processed into low-grade animal feed. But a huge amount is simply disposed of, which often means it's incinerated, creating even more air pollution.
And if you think that's the end of it, think again. Because woven into this entire cycle of production are a whole host of other hidden contaminants that are just as damaging as everything we've already talked about. Just think about it for a second. The crops grown to feed all these animals, they're often drenched in pesticides and chemical fertilizers. The feed itself can be contaminated with microplastics. And the animals, they're often given a steady diet of antibiotics and other medications. All of these chemicals end up back in the environment, creating this toxic cocktail that poisons our soil and our water.
So when you start to add it all up, the polluted water, the toxic air, the chemical contamination, it becomes pretty clear that there's a huge price being paid for our meat. But the real question is, who's actually footing the bill?
And this brings us right to the heart of the matter. This quote from our source material says it all. The ecological follow-up costs are not taken into account in the pricing of meat. What does that mean? In plain English, it means the price you pay at the supermarket doesn't even come close to covering the true cost of that product. We are all paying the real price, in the form of a degraded environment and poorer health.
And that leaves us with one final, really important question to think about. What if it did? What if that price tag on our food truly reflected the total cost of its production, not just for the farmer, but for the planet and for our own health? What would our choices look like then?